Welcome back to another Colts cast, ladies and gentlemen. I'm your host, Matt Danely. Thank you guys for coming back to the show. We've got a Thursday preseason game. We've got cuts on September 1st, and we've got waiver claims on September 2nd. We've got a lot to talk about. This conversation about the Indianapolis Colts 53-man roster is just never going to stop. This is just what we continue to talk about day in and day out. Performances, good and bad, ups and downs, impressions, and so on and so forth. And tonight, to join me in this conversation is Stephen Holder, formerly of the Indy Star, new addition and help of our host of the Athletic being pushed out now, Indiana, which is fantastic. Stephen Holder, thank you, man, for joining me tonight.
Hey, thanks for having me, Matt. This should be good.
Absolutely. So let's kind of let's plug away here and talk about this. Now there's been a lot of talk, obviously, about Terrell Basham and a lot of negativity. He's been here for a full season, in 2 training camps. I mean, is any of the speculation on anybody's part really worth talking about with him not possibly making a roster, in your opinion?
Yeah, so I just finished, like we all do, these 53-man projections. And look, I mean, they're probably not worth the paper they're written on, but that's okay. I mean,
right.
we all have our opinions and our thoughts, and they're fun, right? So right. I did it today, and I kept him, and I didn't have a hard time finding room for him. I thought that it was too early to make a determination for sure. Last year, I almost throw out completely. The Colts went into last year, at least Chris Ballard went into last year, knowing that Terrell Basham was not ideally suited to play in that scheme. So no one is making any judgments based on last year, or at least they shouldn't. Right. I think obviously you'd like to see production no matter what, and the production wasn't there, but that's not a surprise. So I'm not terribly bothered by the fact that he didn't have tons of production last year. I am bothered by the fact that I haven't seen enough consistent production in training camp in this preseason. But that being said, I don't think that a guy who had as much results as he did in college, I don't think that's a guy you walk away from 16 months into his pro career. So I don't think they should walk away. I don't think they will walk away from Terrell Basham, but I do think there should be some heat on him, and I think there will be. But he's got to, at some point, show it, and it doesn't have to be a finished product. He doesn't have to be that now, but he does have to start, I think, showing some indications. You got to flash, and I think those are the things that I'll be looking for.
And I think that's kind of been the deal, right? Because you've seen Terrell Basham a couple plays here. After that, you don't really see the flash. There's just not a lot of that. You get, guys like Ryan Delaire flashing. I mean, obvious flashing, and he's only been here a couple weeks. We haven't seen like a great deal as far as rushing the passer out of Jabal Sheard. But I mean, Kamiko Toure is here for the flash. Ultimately, he is a designated pass rusher this year, more or less, despite where they've got him on the depth chart right now, which is, I mean, it is baffling. You can tell they're not even trying to make that, a depth chart. They're just putting names on paper. We have 90 guys, and that's all that really that depth chart means. But we need more flash. We need more in-game flash from Terrell Basham. I find myself trying to get rid of him, and it's just one of those things where I was really high on him coming into the draft and I was really excited actually that the Colts drafted him. I just continue to see that there's no production value in what he's doing, because he's constantly trying to bull rush and out muscle guys that are as strong or stronger than he is. And he's not putting together moves. He's not got a counter move right now. And it just seems like it's a lot that's going to waste. And I mean, desperately, the Colts need to find a guy that can coach that guy up, or that they can get him to realize, like you said, put some heat on this guy and really make him understand that, look, dude, if you don't get it together, we're moving off of you.
Yeah, I think that has to happen. And I would say, this reminds me a little bit of the Bjorn Werner situation, and not to say that he's in that mold. What I'm saying is, you have a couple of things. You talked about him trying to bull rush guys, right? Mm-hmm. And that was something that I think Werner struggled with. He tried to just beat guys either just on speed which he didn't have enough of to get by. And then when he tried the muscle guys, as you said, those guys were just as strong as he was, and he had nothing else to go to. So I remember, I think year 3 for Werner, I remember Ryan Grigson talking about, he's got to come up with some counter moves. And I'm like, counter moves, dude, it's year 3, And so that's where Terrell Basham is now. It's like, all right, that stuff's not going to work. Okay, you're not going to just be able to muscle anybody at this level. They've seen it all. They've done it all. They've been around the block. So what are you going to bring to the table? What is in your repertoire? And I see him oftentimes, I don't want to say give up because that is too strong of a statement. I don't think he's giving up, but I see him get frustrated all the time when his initial rush doesn't work. Mm-hmm. And he lets himself get taken out of the play. And it's not intentional, but he's allowing it to happen. And that's because he doesn't have anything else to go to. So I see when that happens, you're going to get a frustrated player. And when you have a frustrated player, development, I think, comes slower. So he's got to understand that. And they've got to coach him up too. So this is on them too. They got to coach him up. Robert Mathis is obviously going to play a role in that. These guys got to get him to a point where he is developing those things, because right now he just doesn't have a real menu to go to.
Right. And I almost would rather him have a counter move, but fail at it. You know what I mean? Just so he can at least show that this is what I'm attempting to do, instead of just, it's like, okay, I have no idea. It's almost, it's just like somebody getting, like you said, frustrated immediately right off the jump. It's like, if this doesn't work, I'm out of options. And that's not good. He's not only does he have to have it. I mean, we see them, Stephen, constantly doing their pass rush drills, and that they're being taught to dip, rip, do all this other stuff. He's just not putting together. It just seems like he forgets all of his technique once it gets to the field. And that's something that once there's engagement there with that tackle, that's where things need to happen. And it seems like that's completely out of his mind at that time.
Yeah. And so this often will happen, as you know, with guys who are good athletes. Okay. He's got a good first step. It's very impressive. In fact, you can see it, right? You watch him and you see him get off the ball and you're like, okay, I like that guy. If you took away all the numbers and you just watch who has the first, who's got the fastest first step. If you saw Terrell Basham and you saw everybody else on this roster, you might say, okay, well, that guy's probably the best athlete. Mm-hmm. But then that's where it ends. Because if he doesn't beat you with that first step, which he's capable of doing, mm-hmm. but it's not going to happen very often. And if he doesn't do that, then he's got nothing. So that's really where, as I said, it's got to be a collective effort here. He's got to go all in. The coaches got to be all in. They got to fix him. And then if he still can't do it at that point, then they got to figure out where they're at.
Yeah. It's just really sad that's where they're at with him already. I think I know that there was high hopes for him. I mean, and not only with the Colts fan base, but the coaching staff as well, getting him into a system now that he's, expected to be comfortable in. And it just seems like, that's just not happening yet. So what then do you make of Ryan Dallaire? Do you feel, I mean, I've seen a lot of people, and it's kind of funny because it brings back old memories. They've kind of attached him to like the Caesar Rayford from a few years ago. And I thought it's kind of like that, I guess. I mean, but you just see so much, there's just so much to Dallaire. It looks like he's just been simmering and waiting to showcase what he can do.
Yeah, I tell you what, I mean, you were out there for a lot of training camp, and I remember the first day Dallaire put pads on. I think he might have actually had a scoop and score or maybe a strip sack or something. And it was like, okay, that's flash from day one. And then he keeps doing it in the games. And look, I think someone said this, I can't remember who it was, maybe Mike Chappell, but there's a lot of truth to this. A lot of times his production, in some cases in these games, it has come against backups, right? So much like the Caesar Rayford situation, and we've all learned that lesson. You got to take that for what it is. But what should happen is the guy has to, if a guy is playing against backups, if he's a player, then he should dominate those guys. And oftentimes he is. And that's what I think is really impressive. So he might not be able to go and do that against the starting offensive line of the Cincinnati Bengals next week, but assuming he's finds a spot on the roster, but if he's out there and you give him enough reps, he's a guy who will find his way into making some plays just because he's done it enough that there's something there. Look, the Caesar Rayford situation was also different. The personnel on the team was different at that time, right? I mean, you still had a Robert Mathis. You still had, they had high hopes, obviously, for Werner, who we just talked about, right? So the personnel was different. They had a proven guy. They had a guy who they had huge investment in. They felt pretty good about their situation. And then they had some free agents sprinkled in between. So they were able to part with him and make that trade. And maybe he wouldn't have been productive here no matter who was on the team. But my point is, that was a different situation. Here you have, I think, a much less proven group of rushers. So a guy like Ryan Dallaire, to me, in their situation right now for the Colts, he actually looms a little larger, in my opinion. I think he has something that not a lot of their guys have.
Right. Not to mention, I think Rayford was more of a linebacker, wasn't he? An outside linebacker?
Yeah, I thought he was a tweener, and that's exactly right. That was also one of the issues with him. It's a different scheme completely, right? So a totally different situation. And he was probably a tweener. You get a lot of tweeners in that system, obviously. So that was not ideal as well from that standpoint. So you're right. Yeah.
Right. I'll tell you what, that was fun to watch, though. I mean, when somebody brought that up, man, I remember that he was a beast in the preseason, but that was, man.
But Ryan Dallaire, though, does have, there were high hopes for Ryan Dallaire prior to his injuries, I thought. So this isn't a guy who, just kind of fell off of Mars, and you're like, oh, okay, maybe this guy's a player. Well, no, and people actually had real hopes for him, and that got derailed by his health. So maybe, this isn't a guy who's just coming out of nowhere. It's just a guy who had health issues and maybe is trying to get back to who he previously was.
Right. Yeah, it just kind of shocks me that he wasn't even in the league, that somebody couldn't find a spot for him somewhere with only 2 years in. I mean, I think he had 3.5 sacks his first couple years with Carolina, but it just kind of shocks me because you see obviously what somebody saw in him in the draft process. But this kind of brings me to another question. I don't know that I've ever asked anybody this necessarily, but I continue, whether it's little radio spots here and there, but I got to ask about it today, actually. And it's kind of in line with this culture change that everybody kind of perceives to be going on. Well, I mean, I think that it's obvious. At the same time, to me, it's a little hard to describe. So I'm going to ask you, how do you see with Frank Reich coming in, maybe the scheme change and just kind of everything involved so far with the Colts? What do you see in the change in culture, and what do you kind of attribute it to, I guess, too?
Yeah, what I see is kind of a professionalism, which I like, and that's not to say nothing I'm saying here is a shot at Chuck Pagano. I just think there are different approaches, right? And I think Frank is all business. Now he's not a stiff. Okay, he's not a stiff guy. I think he can loosen up. I think he does loosen up. We saw, for example, the day at training camp where he had his offensive linemen catching punts, and the losers were going to have some kind of, or the winners, I guess, would kind of get out of the evening meetings, right? Offense or defense. So he's shown, I think, an ability to loosen up and to have some fun and to keep guys engaged. But he also, I think, has a really business-like approach, and I think that's a good thing. I also love the fact that Frank Reich, I feel like, is never he's the same guy all the time, and whether things are good, whether things are bad. Now, granted, he hasn't lost a game yet, so we'll see how he handles things when they go badly, because they're going to lose a game. I don't know if you know that, but they're probably going to lose a game.
They are.
But they'll probably lose quite a few. But my point is, I think he seems to me to be like a guy who a player can look to and say, okay, this guy's in control. And I really feel like that matters in a locker room. And the other thing I would say, and I'm going to try to approach this in a story at some point, if I can figure out the path to get to this in writing. But one thing that I've noticed is, for the offensive guys in particular, this won't apply to defense, but for offense, those guys seem to really appreciate the fact that he was a quarterback and has such a way of communicating to them, what he's trying to accomplish offensively. I talked to Jacoby Brissett about this. He said, a quarterback just sees the game differently. Frank Reich was the quarterback for a long time. And this is beneficial not just for the quarterbacks, but also for T.Y. Hilton and Eric Ebron and everybody else on that offense. I talked to Ryan Kelly about this. He said, the quarterback has to see the game totally different. He's got to anticipate things. He's got to understand what everybody's job is. And Frank Reich teaches the offense almost from that standpoint, as if a quarterback was seeing it. And the quarterbacks specifically have told me that they really appreciate the fact that he was one, because it really does give them sort of it just enables them, I think, to have a better rapport with him. And it's just been, I think, really beneficial for everybody involved. So, that's kind of those are kind of my thoughts. But I really do, as I said, like overall, if we're talking about not just offensively, but overall, I think, like I said, the professionalism and the fact that his demeanor always the same, never too high, never too low. And I think that's critical for a head coach, especially for a young team, where these guys are going to take their cues from their coaches. If this were a veteran team, Chuck Pagano had a lot of veteran teams here. I think, we could talk about the fact that he was a little bit looser. Well, yeah, he could be, because he had different teams. The makeup of those teams were very different. So, you had Corey Reddings and guys like that. It was a totally different makeup. This team, I think he has to be much more of a presence. The presence of the head coach is much more important. And I think Frank Reich has the appropriate demeanor for a team like this.
I agree. I think the accountability that it feels like he brings a little bit extra to the accountability factor. And I think that that's very crucial for a young team as well. So I've enjoyed watching them practice. I've enjoyed watching the way that the structure of their practice goes. And I think that I can't get over the fact that I think that the Colts, and this has been something that we've talked about for quite a while now, is the McDaniels issue with Reich. I just can't help but see that it feels so right that the Colts dodged the bullet there. And I mean, we haven't seen him coach a game. We don't know the results of him. We don't know, does he get flustered in certain situations? We don't know any of that yet. But it just really feels, like you said, the professionalism and the business-like approach. It just feels like I almost feel like this would just be a circus under McDaniels. And I just feel like it definitely took the right turn when the Colts needed it to.
Yeah, I don't disagree with anything you just said. And it is interesting. I think it would have been very interesting to see Josh McDaniels with this team. Okay, a young team, a team that I think, as I said, is so reliant on their head coach in terms of looking for cues or taking their cues from the head coach, and I think someone in that role needing to show them the way, right? So that guy would have been Josh McDaniels. And I think all we can draw from is his Denver experience. And he didn't do a very good job of those things there. So it would have been very interesting to see how it might have played out here with a team that I think is so impressionable. In retrospect, that's such a great point, and it's not something that I really thought of initially, right? I thought McDaniels I thought it made a lot of sense, but really, I think, like everyone else, I was caught up in the scheme aspect of it and caught up in the offensive potential aspect of that whole situation, which is it's not insignificant, right? All those things matter. But there are other things that matter too, and I think Frank Reich is a better package in that regard, and he's got scheme as well, right? I mean, he can, we think he has a chance to be a decent play caller. I like theoretically what he wants to do scheme wise, so he has those things as well, but also I think has a better package in those other areas that are just as important.
I agree. He's definitely not a tight ends coach who just lucked into his first head coaching job. He knows what he's doing with the offense, and that's obviously great. We're going to be back to talk a little bit more about the offense here in just a moment with Stephen Holder. All right, guys, welcome back to the show. Stephen, let's talk about this right tackle issue with the Colts right now. Austin Howard obviously has shown that he does not belong there almost in any capacity at all. Braden Smith, I was much more impressed with him, if that's a possibility, than I was in camp as far as in practices. I thought that he's done pretty well in the preseason games there. Not great, obviously, but you see that he's much more of a bi-positional player than he was just a few weeks ago, and I think that that's important for the Colts going forward, regardless of which position he tends to play in more throughout his career, obviously. But I mean, what do we really see right now? Denzel Good goes out on his literally, I guess, on his 20th snap the other night. And now it seems like that door's open wide again. And, for all the times that we've been excited that Anthony Costanzo is the guy and complained about his play, he's been the most durable offensive lineman the Colts have ever seen in the past 15 years. And now, we still have to consider that there's a possibility he could re-aggravate something. So my question is, ultimately, at right tackle, do we see somebody on the roster hold this down? Do we see maybe Braden Smith start early in the season? Or is this somebody who could be on the outside on another team right now and be the result of a waiver claim?
Yeah, so my thoughts on that right now, I think I kind of lean toward what you're saying, which is I like Braden Smith as an option there right now. And I tell you, I really think that here's the thing. He's raw. He's going to commit some penalties. Okay, clearly,
right.
We've seen that from him. He's not polished. All those things are true. I get that, but who has the most upside at that spot? It's going to be him. If he sits there and he practices that at that position every day throughout the season for however long this is necessary, he's going to improve. And I think, for all you know, I mean, sometimes this is how things happen. You fall into things, right?
Right.
For all we know, they could have really developed this kid, and maybe he turns into, a possible long-term solution there. I'm getting way, way, way ahead of ourselves here. Sure. I realize that. But all I'm saying is it might be worth a try. Now, I was not in favor of that when Denzel Good was an option. Mm-hmm. But now, given the Denzel Good situation, I mean, he's walking around the locker room today with a huge brace on his knee. It sounds like it's going to be a few weeks. So, I mean, if they're considering him week to week, my translation for that is multiple weeks. Okay, right. That's how I interpret that. So he's not playing in the opener, at least based on that. Right. So given that situation, I mean, why not stick Braden Smith in there and see what happens? Here's the thing. I mean, you don't have any good options. Austin Howard, as far as I'm concerned, needs to be cut. Okay, he has to go. He has to go. That is a failed experiment. He's 31 years old. Okay, I mean, it's not going to get better.
Right.
Okay. Here's a preview for you. I'm going to make a prediction. It only gets worse.
Right.
Okay. So
that's your depth. That's not good either.
Right. So your depth needs to be a guy who can sort of go in there and you can count on, and have some flexibility too. And he doesn't have that. Joe Haig has that. Mm-hmm. You have some position flexibility there. So I think that if it's me, I cut Howard. I give Braden Smith a shot, and I think he's got the most upside of the guys who are healthy right now. Certainly, Jamarcus Webb, I guess, is an option. I mean, is that any better than putting Braden Smith in there? And frankly, with Webb, you have much less upside, right? So that's why I say, you know what? I think Smith is worth a try. Again, I would have not said this a week ago, but with where they are right now, I think, yeah, Braden Smith. And I also, in training camp, when they were giving Braden Smith all those right tackle snaps, I was kind of not in favor of that because I figured, well, they've got Austin Howard, they got Joe Haig, they got Denzel Good. They don't need to mess with that. What's the point? But to be honest, I'm kind of eating my words. Maybe they were smart, and maybe I was the idiot. So it's turned out to be beneficial because I think he's their best option. We'll see if they agree, but I think they feel pretty, I don't want to say confident, but they feel comfortable putting Braden Smith in there. I really think they do. So yeah. That's what
It's kind of funny that you say that, because I was kind of on the opposite end of that. I was kind of pulling for them to at least try him there in practice, because I figured he's not starting it at the guard. Slauson's got that locked up. Just let's see if he can do anything there. No big deal. And then, they kept doing it and kept doing it. And I was even kind of like, okay, I know I said I wanted him to move him there, but he looks terrible.
Yeah.
Get him out of there. And then he's kind of slowly started to pick it up in the preseason, which is nice. But it's definitely a position that I think they, regardless of what they do as far as starter, I have no qualms about them starting Braden Smith to start the season, but I still think that they may need a waiver claim there for depth, because like you said, I think Austin Howard needs to go. And then it almost makes you wonder, does Denzel Good just kind of wear out his welcome here when he's constantly injured as well? He's not that starter type guy. He's a starter filling in and who has done pretty decent. He's not somebody that they couldn't, improve on or anything like that. And it just, obviously he can't be cut while he's injured. But I mean, I just can continue to run through this in my head. And like you said, Jamarcus Webb, that's not a better starter. No upside there with him. There's a lot of question marks with this offensive line, mainly at the tackle position. Have you noticed a slight bit of, I don't even know really what to call it, as far as, I don't mean like disappointment in him or anything like that, but I just don't see the power out of Ryan Kelly that I did the past couple years. Am I totally out in left field with that?
I think I see what you mean. I think I've seen that at times. I will say overall, his body of work this preseason, I think, has been fine. Mm-hmm. I think he clearly is healthier than he was a year ago. I thought even when he got back from the foot injury, I mean, look, you could tell he just couldn't get it done. Right. He was not himself. So I think he's ahead of where he was last year. There's no question about that. And I feel a lot better about Ryan Kelly. But I do think, I think there are times that interior has not been spectacular. And that has been a mild disappointment this preseason. I think even look at Quentin Nelson to some extent. When he gets his hands on you, okay, forget it. It's a wrap. But there are times where he's going to play like a rookie. And these guys, these defensive tackles are savvy. Mm-hmm. And they're not going to just let you grab them. Okay. So they're, we talked earlier about, moves and counter moves. Okay. Well, those guys have it because they're in confined spaces, and their whole repertoire is hand movement and those sorts of things. So I mean, those guys have it in spades. So he's getting a lot of that right now. He's getting a real big education in there. And as you said, Ryan Kelly, I think it's just a matter of he's got to get back to where he was as a rookie, where I just thought, this guy's upside was tremendous. Yep. I want to see him try to fulfill that this year, because I do know last year he was disappointed. We were disappointed. Certainly the team wasn't thrilled either, but it was his health, right? I think that's truly what it was. Right. It's up to him, I think, to recapture what he showed us as a rookie. And this is the year that will tell us who Ryan Kelly is. So it's a big year for him, no question about it.
Mm-hmm. I'm excited because I was very excited with, you see Slauson being such this sort of enforcer, I guess you could say, of that offensive line early in camp. You think about Ryan Kelly and then Quentin Nelson, who's been, is just so stinking amazing. You put those three in there, you just think, man, these guys are really going to set the tone for this offense. And I just noticed a couple times Kelly getting beaten. I've both been a real, pretty much a heavy supporter of Kelly. Even when he was injured, I thought he wasn't as bad as people were making him out to be. But I just feel that he's kind of, I don't know, maybe hesitant a couple times, and he's paid for it. That may be all it is, or something of that sort. But I want to see him, like you said, return to that rookie form and really kind of just patch together this interior and make them that single punch, and just see these guys be able to dominate defensive lines. But it is going to take some time, and I'm excited to see that. I just hope that Kelly returns to it, as you said.
I felt that after Ryan's rookie season, my projection for him as a second-year player, assuming he would have been healthy, my projection was, okay, this guy's a Pro Bowler in year 2. Mm-hmm. That's where I thought this was going. And so he didn't quite get there, and for very good reason. So I think, again, he will, I think, sort of clarify who he is in 2018, in my mind.
I hope so, and I'm all for it, because that could really fill out a lot of what the Colts' issues have been in the past. Nyheim Hines obviously has shown that he's not a punt returner, and I think that a lot of it's gotten into his head. Not, he was returning a kick the other night, and it just seemed like he was literally just begging for someone to touch him so he could fall and hang on to the ball. I didn't see him trying to be explosive as he meets the mesh, when you're bringing a kick out. And I've noticed that he's kind of got a little bit of opposite of what we saw last year out of Marlon Mack. Last year, Mack seemed, we saw him run between the tackles in preseason and saw him juke, I think it was a guy on the Cowboys, in the hole. And it was like, wow, if he can do that in the regular season, that's something. A lot of during the regular season, we saw him bounce out a little bit more than we would have liked. Hines seems to take the opposite approach. I love that he's physical, but I also kind of am starting to question his vision as a running back, and wondering why he's not hitting some of these outside lanes that are opening up for him. It seems like he'd rather turn it back and get 1 yard instead of maybe having one guy to juke on the outside with a potential big play. I just think that a lot of the fumble and the ball control issues were something that's gotten in his head. And I still have seen it, since all of this started. And I'm curious to get your viewpoint on him and kind of where you think, can they even honestly risk using him in the backfield very often at all? Or are they going to have to strictly use him as a weapon and almost as a predominant slot receiver?
Yeah, I've been wondering the same thing, because, you can say, look, all right, we'll take him off of punt returns. And by the way, they have, because Chester Rogers is listed as the punt returner. I know that the depth chart, means very little right now, but that was a deliberate change they made, like this week. Okay. And I don't think that is accidental. That was, they were letting us know. Okay. And then the game solidified it for me. Right. Okay. Right. It was Chester Rogers, and we also saw Zach Pascal back there. Right. So I think clearly he's not going to return punts. Kicks, we'll see. That's a little bit different animal, because you're not catching the ball in traffic. So I think they may feel somewhat safer on kickoff returns. But punt returns, in traffic, the way you have to be able to catch that ball with guys bearing down on you, that is probably not what he was born to do. Mm-hmm. But what I'd say is you're absolutely right. If this doesn't give you pause, if you're Frank Reich, then you're probably not making a very good decision. I think everything has to be earned, right? And you can't look at Nyheim Hines right now and say, yep, he's earned everything that's coming to him. You can't say that, okay? Because if you put the ball on the ground, that is a cardinal sin. So I don't consider that earning it. I like Nyheim Hines, okay? And I want to love Nyheim Hines. Me too. But I don't love Nyheim Hines right now. I don't know how you can, right? So in my opinion, he's got to go earn it. And that process has to start over a little bit. It would be one thing if this were isolated, but it's not isolated. It's not. I mean, this is a pattern. Right. And you are correct. I really do think that there's something in his head. I remember we watched the Seattle game. I was out there. I saw him, mess around and misjudge the balls, and get the ball, have the ball roll up on him after a punt and muff the thing. Mm-hmm. So I saw those things, and then so we came back home. And that was a Thursday night game. I believe they had a practice on Saturday, that Saturday afternoon. And the very first pass in the team portion, which is, for the listeners, all 11, in the team portion, he dropped the very first pass of the day. And I said, you know what? That is mental. There's no question about it. And he did that later in the practice, too. He had another one. And at that point, he's a guy who's pressing. And this is common, as you know, with young guys. And at that point, now you're trying too hard and nothing good is going to happen. So it's up to Frank Reich to understand that and see what he's dealing with there. And until he gets that under control, I think you have to have an asterisk next to his name, because he's going to let you down. Right. And if he lets you down, okay, the stakes are high. Go back to 2015, the opener in Buffalo. One of the turning points in that game, I thought, was Philip Dorsett putting the ball on the ground. on special teams.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not suggesting they were going to win that game because they had a lot of things go wrong. But at the same time, I think that just set a tone. And it happened early in the game. And I think he might have done it twice, if I'm not mistaken. And to Chuck Pagano's credit, okay, we criticize Chuck a lot, but to his credit, he said, get him the hell out of there.
Right.
And that was the last time we saw him. The very last time we saw him on special teams.
Mm-hmm.
And Frank Reich has not taken that approach for 3 weeks. Well, for the first 2 weeks of the preseason, he was force-feeding Nyheim Hines on punt return. So I guess to your question, I'm getting a little off on a tangent, but I guess my question is, do you hand him the ball on – he's playing third downs a lot too. So, like, do you hand him the ball on 3rd and 2? I mean, do you feel good about that? I don't know. I feel okay throwing him the ball out of the backfield because that's more in his element, right? But I'm with you. I don't know. I think he scares me to death right now. If I'm Frank Reich, I'd be terrified. And again, everything has to be earned. So that, I think, is a very important example to set. I'm not saying bench him. I'm just saying if he's getting 15 touches, I don't know if he's earned that.
Right. One of the things that he said today, I told basically you guys that today. Chris has made it clear to me from day one that he appreciates the mentality and we feel good about our picks, but at the same time, you've got to earn it. He literally said, I mean, for almost verbatim that today. And that to me meant a lot, just seeing that, because it's so hard for a guy who goes out and makes these picks. I mean, look, there's a reason that only 32 people, at one time, not just because there's only 32 teams, but because these GM jobs are not only highly coveted, but they're hard. It's hard as hell to be a GM in the NFL. And if you are going to basically admit mistake on one of these picks, you have to be a special kind of person to say, sorry, I made a mistake. We're moving on. No harm. I mean, they did it with Zach Banner last year. And do they do that again this year? Who knows? But I like the mentality that not only has obviously Frank Reich feeling that way, but it seems that it's he and Ballard are very much on the same page with that. And not only that, but that they appreciate each other for feeling that way. And I think that that's something that you really need when you have a team with so much youth and you've got to have these guys prove themselves day in and day out. This is really, I think, so many steps in the right direction, regardless of a few speed bumps that it might put in the way.
Yeah, I think that approach is critical. And we talked earlier about this being a team that's young and impressionable. And the last thing that you want these guys to start believing is that they're owed something. Okay, so as a new coaching staff in particular, I think you have to set expectations. So it's very important that Frank Reich and his coordinators and his position coaches as well, they all have to set their expectations. And I talked to players at times under the old regime who this was probably isolated, but there were players who felt like, guys are getting things they're not entitled to in some cases, right? There were players who, and I'm not going to say or name names. I'd have to think about it a little bit, to be honest. But there have been guys over the years who, he's on the team because they drafted him, or the coaches like him, so he's getting all the reps. And there was too much of that. I think you don't ever want guys to. Look, guys will always think that way because everyone thinks they're the best player, right? And everyone thinks they should be playing over someone else. So you will always have some of that sentiment. But when it starts to really take hold and there's too much of that, that's when you have a problem. And that's when you as a coaching staff have not set expectations. And I think it also probably impacts incentive the wrong way. It has a negative impact on other guys' incentive to go out there and try to earn it themselves, right? Because if your thinking is, well, I'm not playing this guy in practice, but he's still getting the reps. Well, what's that about, right? I mean, that's going to leave you a little defeated. So it is very important. I think you're absolutely right. Very important that they really double down on that. And I think Chris Ballard Chris Ballard is probably the most accountable guy I've ever dealt with in my career, probably. I mean, I think maybe Pat Riley might be a close second, but but he's Pat Riley, so he can say I suck all day long. He's still Pat Riley, right? Chris Ballard's a second-year GM, and the guy is completely fearless when it comes to saying I screwed up. So, look at something as small as the TJ Green situation. Last year, they moved into corner, and Chris totally fell on the sword over that. I thought, a few months ago, he told us, he said, yeah, that was me. Don't put that one on Chuck. That was me. It was a bad idea. And, it wasn't a bad idea to find out, but it was a bad idea to do it in the third week of training camp, right? So Chris Ballard, he completely fell on the sword there, took that one on the chin. Zach Banner, as you mentioned, so I do think that is a great part of the culture right now. And if you do it too much, then that's going to make me ask questions about you. But
sure.
But if they do it in spots, that says that these guys aren't going to waste time, and that's a very important thing for everybody involved.
Absolutely agree. And Ballard has told us that the locker room is watching, and this is exactly what he's talking about, stuff like this. So it's important that this gets kind of hammered into that new, the new reshaping of this Indianapolis Colts culture. So guys, we're going to take another quick break. We're going to come right back, finish up the show with Stephen Holder. All right, Stephen, here is another question that I've been asked several times, and I keep saying no and no and no, but people keep hammering it home. Is there any chance at all that this Colts roster carries 5 tight ends?
I say 4, but I understand why you'd ask that. I mean, I think it's one of their deepest spots, and in fact, there are a lot of spots where I'm like, you know what, I don't love any of these guys. Okay, right. And yet tight end is one of those where I'm like, okay, I like all these guys. So that is very interesting. And what's also interesting is you have a lot of duplication there to some extent. So I wonder how that's going to impact the numbers. When I say duplication, I mean just in terms of the skill sets, right? So how different are Ross Travis and Eric Swope, for example, right? I mean, I don't think they're that different. They're not exactly the same, but certainly both basketball bodies, both former basketball players, in fact, both who are primarily receiving tight ends, right? So then I go to a guy like Darrell Daniels, who is very different, can help you in the passing game and has, but I think is also a more accomplished blocker and a guy who may, who they may try to keep because they have problems at tackle right now, right? Jack Doyle can certainly, serve as a protector, right? But but I think it's important. I think that's something they have to consider at least, just given their tackle situation. So I struggled with that when I did my roster projection, which I just posted tonight, and I think I ended up. I don't have it in front of me, but I think I ended up with the 4 tight ends being. I don't feel great about this, but but the 4 tight ends being Ebron, Doyle, Travis, and Swope. And I don't feel great about that 4th spot. I feel like I should have maybe traded Daniels for Swope or Travis. I think you can kind of flip a coin there. I don't feel strongly either way. But I hear what you're saying. Doing what you're saying would solve the problem, right? They just keep all 5. 5 is a lot, though, so we'll see. But you're talking about Frank Reich, who feels very strongly about his tight ends in his offense, and they have a huge role. So that's where it's plausible, and then special teams as well. So is it conventional? No, not at all. Is it out of the question? Probably with most teams, but maybe not this one.
That's kind of where I landed, but I like I said, I can't even get my brain to wrap around it. So I'm kind of excluding the thought process of it. But like you've made some great points that with this offense, this might be one where where it is plausible. And Daniels is a hard guy to come off of because he does look good in the passing game as well occasionally. And if you can get that out of a guy who is known as primarily a blocker, then you know that's a plus. Obviously, that's an extra chip right there for him. So it's going to be fun to watch and very interesting to watch it kind of navigate itself through this 53-man then waiver claims. There's 2 or 3 days there where it seems like the 53-man roster changes about every 5 or 6 hours, and it's exciting. You're getting to that point where you're actually going to figure out what this roster looks like. Stephen, aside from the tight ends, where do you put the strengths of this roster, and even afterwards, if you could drop a couple weaknesses? I think we can pretty much guess, at least a handful of the weaknesses. But what are the two strength, or the strength and the weakness that stand out to you the most?
You know what's interesting? I have gone from not liking their running back situation at all to actually kind of liking it, and now. I don't like it week 1 because it sure feels like Marlon Mack's not playing.
Right.
So bear with me on that. But if you just look beyond that, let's say Marlon Mack is healthy, I actually don't feel too bad about this backfield. I don't like any one guy at a level like that's off the charts, not at all. But I like the variety. I like the uniqueness of some of these guys. Marlon Mack, I thought he had a great training camp when he got going, and I think he showed a willingness at least to be a one-cut guy. Right. If he can do that, then Marlon Mack is a different player. And I talked to Frank Gore on a regular basis, and he's still watching him, and that's what we've talked about. He said, Marlon can do it. He's like, he's just got to do it. And so it's going to boil down to him basically just making up his mind to be that guy. And I also go back to last year playing with the labrum injury, right? I mean, that had to impact his ability to really be physical. So I give him a little bit of a pass on that. So I like running back more than I ever thought I was going to. And we haven't even talked about Robert Turpin because, I mean, look, I think in 4 weeks we could have a totally different impression based on how these guys play. Maybe Jordan Wilkins steps up and makes a few plays, and Nyheim Hines, for all of my concerns about him, I still really like Nyheim Hines. I think he's going to get the football in some capacity. So Frank Reich has a lot to work with there. The tight ends, as you said, I really like that group, very deep. The defensive line, it's funny. There's a lot of numbers there. There's a lot of guys who are worthy of making the team, but I don't see a ton of standout guys, and that's the problem there. I see a lot of average. So we'll come back to that. But, the safeties, I really like, obviously, the two starting safeties right now, Clayton Gathers and Malik Hooker. They look like they're on top of their game, which is amazing because neither of them did a damn thing during the offseason. Okay. And so Malik Hooker has no business making the kind of plays he's made. Okay. None. All right. This guy is coming off an ACL. He and I were talking last week. He didn't have surgery until very late October, almost November. So he is 10 months out from ACL surgery?
Yeah, we're almost.
Are you kidding me? Like that is just like freak of nature stuff. He is a freak. There's just no other way to phrase it. So Malik Hooker, if he stays healthy, and he's had trouble doing that, granted, but if he stays healthy, I don't know where his ceiling is, man. I am so that play he made on Saturday. I know it's one play, and I'm probably making too much out of it, but I haven't seen a guy on this team be able to make a play like that in many years.
Right.
And that's the thing, man. It takes when you don't really have a lot of depth, your stud's got to make plays like that because that can bail you out.
Yep.
And so that's where I'm really optimistic about the defense. They have a few playmakers. They have guys like that. They have Clayton Gathers. I think Darius Leonard, spectacular potential.
Absolutely.
I mean, we didn't talk about him, and the linebackers are certainly not a strength, but that guy has a chance to be a stud. Mm-hmm. So of the positions I guess I'm concerned about, I would say, look, wide receiver, it's not a huge concern because I think they're going to spread the ball around multiple positions. but I don't love the depth there. I think they're adequate at the top three, and then after that, flip a coin. That's kind of what you're looking at there. Reese Fountain, just been a disappointment for me.
Me too.
We haven't seen Flash. We talked about Flash earlier. When has the Flash come? When has there been any Flash there? He had a play on Saturday, good route, came back to the football, made a clean catch, tapped his toes. That was impressive. I like that play. And had he done that more often, I'd say, all right, there's something there. But I haven't seen anything on a consistent basis there. So I'm not making a judgment about him, after one off season, but I would like to have seen more because there was certainly opportunity.
Oh, for sure.
Definitely opportunity. It's not as if they were loaded. Okay.
Right.
He never, all right. Deion Kane proved that there was opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. He went out there and he took the opportunity and got hurt. KJ Brent. Right. So anyway, Reese Fountain, I'd like to see more. I put him, he's a little bit in the same conversation as Basham, but not to that extent because he's much newer. Right. Linebacker, obviously, that's a concern. But you know what? Those guys, man, they're going to run around like chickens with their heads cut off, and they're going to make some plays by accident. Mm-hmm. I think that's the thing. They're young, they're fast, they get to the football. I talked about this with Booger McFarland last week after the Monday night game, and we sort of I did an interview with him the following day, and he said that was his impression. He's like, I don't know if they know what they're doing, but those guys run. They get to the football. So they're going to make a lot of tackles. They might be 6 yards down the field, but they're going to make a lot of tackles, and they're going to be around the ball. So you just keep doing it, and then eventually, hopefully something turns. So we'll see how it goes. But and then I would say corner is just I'm just uninspired.
Right.
I will tell you, I am a Kenny Moore fan, though. Mm-hmm. I'm buying the Kenny Moore hype. I think that kid has instincts that you can't teach, and I was appalled day one when he was playing over Quincy Wilson, but I now understand it, right? I'm not saying he's going to be a better player than Quincy Wilson in the long term. I'm saying he has something there that is very tangible, mm-hmm. and it's instincts, it's playmaking. He had a couple plays on the football on Saturday that were critical, and if he can continue to do that, and this defense allows him to do that, right? If he can continue to do that, he's going to be a very trustworthy player for this team. So kudos to him for taking advantage of his opportunity.
And I think that's why I like him in the slot so much. I know that they've not at the boundary, and that's fine because he's earned that attempt anyways. And I think he's done pretty well at times as well out there. But that's why he just isn't a guy. Look, playing nickel is completely a different animal than playing as a boundary corner because you have to sift through the trash constantly with guys crossing the field, and there's just no end to the physicality you have to be in the mindset that you have to do to run through that gamut every single play. And he has that, and that's what I do love about him. And I think that he's perfect for that route or for that role.
Yeah, I totally agree. So I always talk about my Tampa background. Anybody who knows me knows that. And look, I was fortunate enough to cover Rondé Barber, right? And still talk to Rondé, great guy, one of my favorites all time. And the one thing Rondé Barber had, because he was a lot like Kenny Moore, very undersized. Tiki was always a much bigger guy, his twin brother. Tiki being a running back who's thicker, definitely a more muscular guy. Rondé, while very well built, was not Tiki's size. So, and certainly not a tall guy, 5'9" or so. And so, yet but really the reason he was such a good slot corner was instincts and just an ability to react faster than everybody else. So I saw a little bit of that. Look, Kenny Moore, let me be clear. Kenny Moore is not Rondé Barber. Okay. So now that we got that out of the way, all right. But what I saw from him, there was a play, I thought it was a second down play in the red zone right before Malik's, I think right before Darius Leonard's near interception. The play before that, Kenny Moore sees the ball going to 81, and he's playing in the slot. The ball goes to 81, and Garoppolo thinks he has him. And Kenny Moore gets such an incredible break on the ball that he just gets there, and it's like Garoppolo can't believe it. And it's like, how did he get to that ball? because I'm sure he saw him, right? But he made such a great attempt. He made such a great break on the ball that he gets there and he knocks it down for the deflection. And so when he's in the slot and he has, especially in the zone, when he has the advantage of being able to watch the quarterback a little bit, or at least spy him a little bit, when you can, at times when you can take your eyes off of the traffic, that's going to be such an advantage for him because, again, his instincts are so good and he has such quickness that he's really going to be able, I think, to take advantage of those situations. So I agree with you. He's probably a marginal outside corner, but capable, but marginal. But I think he has really shown himself to be a huge asset in the slot. And I tell you what, Nate Hairston is going to be the loser here because I think Kenny Moore is your nickel and should be. He's going to make plays there.
Mm-hmm. I agree. And I think that you like seeing that Nate is the next guy up, though, too. I think he's done pretty well for himself. But I definitely agree. I'm starting Kenny Moore in the nickel if I'm, if I'm making the decision, which obviously I am not. But we agree on that for sure. Steven, it's been great having you on. Before I get you out of here, my man, I'm going to ask you about a surprise cut. Who's your surprise cut? On the initial 53. Let me put it that way.
Well, this one's tough. I think it's I don't know if I have a surprise cut, but I didn't cut this guy, but a surprise cut for me would be Reese Fountain. I don't think they'll do it. But that is the Zach Banner decision last year has given me pause.
Right.
And I just now Zach Banner, I think, was much more of a project pick than maybe Reese Fountain, who I think I didn't see him as a project necessarily, but maybe he's turned into one. But my point is, so I guess I'm not predicting it. Okay, so I'm not really giving you what you want for your.
It just wouldn't surprise.
But I think it's something to watch. Again, there's precedent there, and Chris Ballard, look, he has not hesitated to pull the trigger on anything. The first thing he did when he got in the building was trade Dwayne Allen, damn near, right? So I mean, this guy is not hesitant to do what he thinks is right. Now, again, it would shock me. It would really stun me because he's one off season into his career, but something to watch. I mean, the production is just not there. Beyond that, I actually don't think there's a ton of shocking cuts to be had. One thing that I noticed in doing the roster cut down was I was a little disappointed in the maybe bottom third of the roster. It's not very good. And that kind of reinforced it for me when I was looking at the actual names and trying to piece it together. It's a very interesting exercise because it gives you a better sense of what's there. We get caught up in the guys at the top, right? Because those are the ones that matter. But injuries will make you have to tap into that bottom of the roster inevitably, without a doubt. And so it really did crystallize for me, man, they got to turn the bottom of this roster because it's not very good. So that's why I think they'll claim a bunch of guys on Sunday. So watch out for that.
I agree. I think that maybe that the Colts have lucked out to where they've been able to. I think they're going to. Let me put it this short and sweet. I think they're going to be able to stash Reese Fountain if they do cut him because he hasn't had much preseason, feature. He's not been doing anything. So it's not like it's coming down to we've got 4 really good receivers, 5 really good receivers, and he's just, I know he's a rookie and I know he's a draft pick, but he just happened to be. I just think they're going to be able to stash him. I don't think that he's been able to show enough teams enough of what he can do where somebody would claim him. Now, when you have those athletic traits, you've got that length and everything else. Maybe somebody else wants to take a stash at him, and as long as he's on the practice squad, teams can bring him up to their regular or to their active roster anyhow. So you always run the risk with it, not just initially. So I think that like you said, I think that makes perfect sense that you could see. It wouldn't surprise me if they did it, but I guess I don't know how to. I honestly don't know how to go about it because I've been struggling with him ever since about the second week of practice. I don't know whether to say it surprised me or it wouldn't surprise me because I mean, look, he's not in a massive competition here. We haven't really seen despite what the Colts coaching staff has said about Ryan Grant, we haven't seen any chemistry between he and Luck at all.
Right.
And that's an issue. And then you get to 4. You said, like you said, flip a coin. You got Pascal. You've got, a couple other guys there, even Shontavious Jones. You've got some guys that have some big playability, but that's really, it is all based on potential. There's nothing on paper about these guys and what they've proven or done or anything else like that. So it's just interesting. It's going to be very interesting to see how this initially falls. And then, obviously with the waiver claims and whatnot. One of the guys that I've kind of toyed with, and I know he's predominantly played with the first team, but there's just something about him in this system that just isn't clicking for me. And I could totally be off base here, but I just continue to not find a place for Margus Hunt.
Yeah, I struggled with him too. First of all, I thought that when they were in the offseason, when they were kind of getting rid of guys, frankly, for lack of a better word, who didn't fit their scheme, I kept waiting for the Margus Hunt transaction, right? I was like, all right, well, he didn't fit. You can't cut everybody. I get that. It's the reason like Al Woods is here, right? Like you can't cut everybody. But Al Woods isn't an ideal, 4-3 nose tackle, I suppose. But my point is, I kept waiting for that to happen, right? Because part of the reason Cincinnati thought he wasn't a good fit was because of their scheme. Then they moved to the 4-3. They were like, yeah, you don't fit. So, and plus he didn't make any plays. But yeah, he has. It's funny. He has had some production, or at least some flash.
Right.
He has, and I keep trying to figure out whether it's just, by virtue of, just coincidence, or and like at the end of the day, he has enough of a body of work that we should know who he is, right? It's like, so do I change my opinion based on a little bit of preseason flash?
Sure.
I don't know about that, right? I mean, this is a guy in his 5th year or something like that. So I mean, I don't think that's actually might be a 6th, right? So I don't think that's the way to go about it, right? I mean, we have enough tape on Margus Hunt over 4 or 5 years of NFL play to say, all right, we know what he is. So I mean, it'll be interesting. And then there's, just the whole issue of like these younger guys, right? When they get Kamoko Toure going, right, and obviously John Simon's going to play a bunch. He's not a young guy, but I'm just saying in terms of where do the snaps come,
right?
That becomes an issue for me. Basham, if he sticks around, I mean, I would assume they'll give him a shot. He's going to get some at bats. So I mean, how many defensive ends are we playing here, right? So so I'm with you. I think that is going to be interesting. The only thing I'd say on Margus Hunt is he does have some obviously ability on special teams, and that may be the saving grace with him. That may be how he makes it. That may be why he's still here to begin with.
Mm-hmm. I don't think that they necessarily have to move, like completely get rid of him, but then you kind of get into the situation whereas we clearly saw him better as a defensive tackle last year than he's really done this year. Why not just use him kind of sparingly as an extra guy for that? While he's not lightning quick by any means, but he did show some burst and some speed last year and showed some ability to collapse the pocket from the interior. So, I mean, whatever they end up doing, I'm kind of on board with, but he's just a guy that I'm really watching to kind of see, how it all ends up, because that front 7 group, or rather just the front 4 even, is going to be one of the most interesting spots to look at, come cuts. And I just continue to look at that group and think, Tyquan Lewis, they said he's not going to be IR'd, but how long is he going to be out? They said he's not close. So, I mean, are we looking, 3-4 weeks maybe?
Yeah.
That's disconcerting, because you really want to see what this guy has. He's got a lot of what they need up there. And as often as this front 4 slants like so dramatically in one direction or the other, these these big plays, these big running plays, anytime there's a hesitation by the running back at all, a counter step or anything like that, those big openings are going to open up for him, because basically you've got two linemen there taking on linebackers because all the defensive line has completely shifted one way or the other 5 yards. So this is part of it, and it's going to be interesting to watch. I'm excited to watch these cuts because I think the Colts have a viable defense. They're going to literally bring back the mantra of the cardiac Colts, as you wrote, basically with your piece on the bend don't break style defense and what they've got right now, because that's exactly what it is. It is going to be an exciting year. We're going to give up a ton of yards, but we may luck out. Basically, can you force them into field goals more often than you think Andrew Luck can throw touchdowns? I mean, that's ultimately what we're looking at right here this year, I think. So it's going to be fun to watch nevertheless, but there's going to be a lot of interesting moves possibly here in the next few days. This weekend's going to be quite interesting.
Yeah, it's a calculation. There's no question about it. And I tell you what, that's what I've told people all off season. I don't know how good they're going to be. I still think we have such an incomplete picture because Frank Reich has intentionally created that, right? He hasn't shown what they're going to do. So they have a little bit of an advantage there. But again, we have such an incomplete picture of what we're looking at that it's hard to make an assessment. Talk about guys like Tyquan Lewis, right? What is he? I have no idea. But that being said, I don't know how they're going to do. But what I do know is that, as you said, it is going to be very interesting. There's going to be much more intrigue than last year, where we were all just kind of waiting for it to end so we could talk about the draft, right? That's not going to be the case. Now, their record may not be good, right? But I still think you're going to enjoy this more if you're really truly looking at this with an open mind. You understand this is a process, and you know that they're in the middle of that process somewhere. They're not toward the end. If that's what you think, then you should completely reassess your view of football, right? And you don't know as much about football as you think you do. So everybody who understands that, and I think most people do, most fans who are really paying attention, and those are the ones listening to us, they know, right? They understand this. Right. So if it ends up being 6-10, that's going to suck. But as a fan, but it depends, right? It depends on what that looks like, and they could be 8-8. I don't know. I'm just saying, if it ends up being something less than you want it to be in terms of the record, the one thing you could count on is that you're going to learn a lot about this team this year because there's a lot of intrigue. We don't know a lot about a lot of these players. So, and then there's Andrew Luck, which we're back where they've been for so many years, right? How far can Andrew Luck take them? That really is what it boils down to. I know that's a terrible way to go about it, but it's also not much different than most teams. So at the end of the day, I think we criticize them somewhat too much for that. It is a quarterback league, and teams go as their quarterback goes.
Absolutely. It is going to be exciting. And when people ask me, hey, are they going to be any good? It's like, I don't know, but they're going to be exciting. There is going to be some excitement this year, especially if you're looking long term. And I think that's what honestly, I think fans are willing to grasp at that. I think that they're willing to hang on to that because that is something that they haven't had the past couple of years. And to be able to look at the team and see what's building, what's kind of simmering for the future, I think is hope. Hope can change a lot of people's minds, and that's going to be fun for us to watch this year. Stephen, thank you so much for joining me tonight. It was a real treat to have you on. I appreciate it. It was a great conversation. Make sure you guys are going to check out Stephen's work at The Athletic Indiana. Pay for the subscription. You're not going to be disappointed in what you get. Stephen always brings some great analysis and points that just as you guys have heard tonight that you may not have had around in your brain. So Stephen, thank you again for jumping on the show tonight. Had a blast.
All right, same here. Thanks for having me, Matt.
Absolutely. Make sure you guys are going and checking out the podcast, rate and review. Appreciate that every night, every time. Thank you guys for joining us tonight. We'll check you out next time on the Colts Cast.